Jim Wallace, do you recognize the name? He represents the third generation of his family to serve in the police department. He's been a patrol officer, he's worked undercover, he's been on a SWAT team, but solving cold cases as a homicide detective in LA primed the former atheist for God's intervention in his life. Friends who attended Rick Warren's Saddleback Church had invited Jim and his wife to join them many times. At 35, the disinterested unbeliever finally relented, and he was in church on Sunday for the very first time. He couldn't resist applying the principles of investigation to Jesus' death.
As I read through the Gospels for the first time, what I was so intrigued by was the evidential nature of Jesus. The fact that he would always come into a city and provide evidence for belief and then preach behind that evidence. So for example, he would say often in the Gospel of John, if you don't believe what I'm telling you, at least believe on the evidence of the miracles I've offered you. And then for 40 days with the apostles in the book of Acts chapter 1, he spends 40 days, it says in Acts 1 verses 2 and 3, giving the apostles additional proofs, many convincing proofs. And I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute now, you've just risen from the dead. Okay, how much more do I really need after the resurrection? But apparently he wanted to offer 40 more days of convincing proofs. Then, when it's time to select a replacement for Judas, they're in the upper room in Acts chapter 1. And how do they pick that guy? Well, they say, we need somebody who can testify as an eyewitness who saw everything from the baptism to the resurrection. We're looking for eyewitnesses. And it turns out, when they share the gospel throughout the entire book of Acts, they do it in the same way. They say, hey, you know what? The Old Testament predicted this stuff, and we saw Jesus rise from the dead with our own eyes. We're here to testify to the resurrection. The raw evidential nature of Christianity was so powerful. As a matter of fact, as a skeptic, who, you know, we might say to your son if he's having doubts, you might say, oh, well, you know, you just need to trust more, you need to pray about it. That's not what Jesus did. When John had doubts, John the Baptist, and he sent his disciples to Jesus, and John's in captivity. And his disciples come and say, hey, John sent us, and he wants to know, are you the one? I'm sure Jesus at the time might have felt like, oh my gosh, really? Okay. What does he do? He doesn't go and tell the disciples, go back and have John pray about him. He needs to have deeper faith. No, he says, hang on a minute. He does miracles in front of John's disciples, and he says, go back and tell John what you saw. So Jesus clearly takes an evidential approach to belief. It's not belief in spite of evidence. It's not belief in lieu of evidence. It's trust because of the evidence. And this is what he always would say. And this is why you see this pattern of healings and preachings, where now my words have merit because you've seen who I am. You've seen what I can do. And that was very powerful to me as somebody who was a skeptic, who was an evidentialist, who wanted to, could never embrace a view that required me to turn off that part of my mind. And it turns out this is the one, or what, you know, this is really the theistic worldview that is verifiable or falsifiable based on whether or not this thing happened. Did the resurrection occur? And because it's an event that occurs in a fixed point in time in the past, like all of my cold cases, we can actually apply some of these techniques we use in cold cases to look at the resurrection.
Detective Jim Wallace is officially retired, but he'd been called back to work on one more cold case when he was with us last time. From an atheist to an apologetic speaker, author, and defender of the faith. Love it. In his view, it's criminal for anyone to go through life with a dead spirit, missing out on the life that is truly life. That's what Paul called it. These are the transformational stories we love to share here on 100 Huntley Street, knowing that people of all ages from all walks of life need the Lord. Thank you for enabling us to point them to Him. Now, you can take a detective's approach, if you'd like to, with J. Warner Wallace's book, Cold Case Christianity. A homicide detective investigates the Gospels.